The scent of polished mahogany and old paper hung heavy in the courtroom as I sat rigidly beside my lawyer, my fingers clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles had turned white. I was 64 years old, and after 42 years of marriage, I was finally doing what I should have done decades earlier. But Edward wasn't going to make this easy. He sat on the opposite side with his high-priced attorney, Mr. Davidson, wearing an expression of supreme confidence that made my stomach turn. Too confident, too certain of victory. Then something happened that none of us could have predicted. "Your Honor," a soft but clear voice rang out from the gallery behind me. "May I please show you something that my grandmother doesn't know I have?" I twisted around in my seat to see my 13-year-old granddaughter, Emma, standing with her mother's old phone clutched tightly in both hands. My daughter Rachel looked just as shocked as I felt, her eyes wide with surprise. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair, leaned forward with interest. "And who might you be, young lady?" "I'm Emma Wilson, ma'am. I'm Helen's granddaughter." "Your Honor, this is completely inappropriate and irregular," Mr. Davidson protested loudly, half rising from his chair with indignation. Judge Patterson raised one hand firmly. "I'll permit it. Come forward, child." When Emma pressed the play button on that phone, the entire courtroom fell into absolute silence. And as my husband's voice filled the room with words I'd never heard before, his face drained of all color until he looked almost gray. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me explain how we arrived at this moment. 3 months earlier, I had been standing in the kitchen of the home Edward and I had shared for more than 4 decades. It was a Wednesday morning, and I was preparing his breakfast exactly as I had done every single day since 1982. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast lightly buttered, coffee with just a splash of cream. The routine was so deeply embedded in me that I could have done it blindfolded. "Helen," his voice thundered from somewhere upstairs. "Where's my gray suit jacket? The one I specifically told you to take to the dry cleaners." My hands froze over the eggs for just a moment. I had taken it to the cleaners. I had picked it up yesterday. I'd hung it carefully in his closet on the left side, second hanger from the end, precisely where he preferred it. "It's in your closet, dear," I called back, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "Left side, second from the end." I could hear him stomping around up there, closet doors banging, drawers being yanked open. Then silence. He'd found it, naturally. Right exactly where I'd told him it would be. But there would be no acknowledgement, no thank you, no apology for doubting me. There never was. This was my life. Had been my life for so long I could barely remember anything different. Wake up at 6, prepare breakfast, clean the entire house, make lunch, run whatever errands needed doing, prepare dinner, go to bed, wake up and repeat. 42 years of the exact same routine. Edward came down the stairs with his jacket on, looking every bit the successful retired executive. He was 67 now, still handsome in that distinguished silver-haired way that made people trust him instantly. He'd retired 3 years ago as the chief financial officer of a large manufacturing firm, and since then he'd been home constantly, which meant I'd been under his watchful, critical eye every single moment. "Coffee's lukewarm," he said without even glancing at me as he sat down at the table. I had poured it exactly 45 seconds ago. Steam was still rising from the cup. "I'll make a fresh pot," I said quietly. "See that you do properly this time. And Helen, we need to discuss your sister. My sister Barbara had called me the previous evening. She'd asked if I wanted to meet for lunch sometime this week, maybe go shopping together afterward." "What about her?" I asked carefully, pouring the perfectly good coffee down the sink drain. "I don't think you should be spending so much time with her lately. She's putting ideas in your head, filling it with her nonsense. Barbara had been telling me for years to leave Edward. She'd witnessed firsthand the way he spoke to me, the way he controlled every single aspect of my existence. She'd called it emotional abuse, manipulation, coercive control. I'd called it marriage, told myself it was normal. We're just planning to have lunch together, Edward. Nothing more than that. No, you're not. His voice was flat, final, brooking no argument. Call her back and cancel. Tell her you're too busy with other commitments. Something inside me fractured that morning. Maybe it was his tone of absolute authority. Maybe it was the sudden realization that I was 64 years old and still being told who I could or couldn't have lunch with. Maybe it was remembering that I'd given up my entire career as a teacher 42 years ago because Edward had insisted his career was more important, more valuable. And now I had nothing to show for those decades except an empty existence. No, I heard myself say. The word escaped before I could stop it. Edward's head snapped up so fast I thought he might have hurt his neck. "What did you just say to me?" I said no, I repeated, my voice somehow steady despite my racing heart. "I'm having lunch with my sister, she's family." The explosion was instantaneous and terrifying. He shot to his feet so violently that his chair toppled backward and crashed to the floor. "How dare you defy me? After everything I've provided for you. This house, this lifestyle, this comfortable life, this house that I clean every single day," I interrupted. "This life where I can't even have coffee with my own sister without your permission? You ungrateful." He stopped himself, but his face had turned an alarming shade of red. "Fine, have your precious lunch. But don't come crying to me when you realize just how good you have it here, how much worse it could be." I had lunch with Barbara that day. And the following week. And the week after that. With each lunch, each long conversation, I started to remember fragments of who I used to be. Helen Sullivan, the teacher who'd worked with special needs children and loved watching them learn. The woman who'd wanted to travel to Europe, who'd loved reading poetry, who'd had dreams and ambitions beyond being someone's wife. 9 weeks after that first defiant no, I filed for divorce. Edward had actually laughed when I told him, actually thrown his head back and laughed as if I'd told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. "You're leaving me? You're 64 years old, Helen. You have no money of your own, no career, no marketable skills anymore. Where exactly do you think you're going to go? What do you think you're going to do?" Rachel said I could stay with her and Emma until I get things sorted out and figured out. His expression shifted instantly from amusement to something much darker. "Of course she did. She never liked me anyway. Probably been poisoning you against me for years, hasn't she?" "Nobody poisoned me, Edward. I just finally woke up after 42 years of sleeping." That's when the threats began in earnest. He would make absolutely certain I got nothing in the divorce. He would tell everyone we knew that I was mentally unstable, having some kind of breakdown. He would prove in court that I was an unfit mother and grandmother. The words poured from him like toxic waste, and I suddenly realized I'd been drinking that poison for more than 4 decades. I moved in with Rachel and Emma 2 days later, taking only my clothing, a few books, and my personal photographs. Rachel was 36, divorced herself 3 years earlier, and she understood exactly what I was going through in ways I'd never fully appreciated before. Emma, my precious granddaughter with her mother's dark curls and my green eyes, hugged me fiercely when I arrived with my suitcases. "I'm so glad you're here, Grandma," she whispered against my shoulder. "Mom's been worried about you for such a long time." Living with them felt like breathing fresh, clean air for the first time in decades. I helped with cooking because I enjoyed it, but Rachel never demanded it, never expected it. I spent time with Emma helping with her homework, listening to her talk enthusiastically about school and her friends. I started reading again. Real books, not just the ones Edward had approved of. Small paperback novels at first, then poetry collections I'd loved in my youth. But Edward wasn't finished with me. Not by a long shot. The divorce proceedings officially started, and that's when I met Mrs. Kim, my attorney. She was impressively sharp, in her mid-40s with a direct, no-nonsense manner I found comforting. "Mrs. Wilson," she said at our very first meeting, "I need you to be completely honest with me about everything. How are your finances currently?" "I don't have any," I admitted, feeling the shame of it. "Everything is in Edward's name exclusively, the house, both cars, all the bank accounts, the investment portfolio, his pension. He always insisted it was easier that way for tax purposes." Mrs. Kim's jaw tightened visibly. "That's unfortunately very common in cases like yours, but you need to understand something important. You're entitled to half of all marital assets. After 42 years of marriage, any court will recognize that you contributed significantly to the marriage, even without a paycheck." "He's not going to make this easy for me," I said quietly. "I didn't imagine he would. Has he exhibited any concerning behavior since you filed the papers?" I thought about the phone calls that came at all hours, always late at night. The emails calling me selfish, crazy, delusional. The way he'd driven past Rachel's house multiple times, slowly, as if surveying it. "He's been very persistent," I said carefully. Document absolutely everything, Mrs. Kim instructed firmly. Save every email, every voicemail, every text message. If he shows up at the house unannounced, call the police immediately. Don't engage with him. I did document everything meticulously, but I had no idea that Emma was doing the exact same thing, building her own secret archive. The custody hearing came first, about 4 weeks before the main divorce proceedings. It wasn't technically custody since Emma wasn't our child, but Edward had filed for mandatory grandparent visitation rights, which meant we all had to appear before Judge Patterson. Edward arrived with Mr. Davidson and an entire multimedia presentation about what a devoted, loving grandfather he'd allegedly been. He had photographs carefully selected from birthday parties, Christmas mornings, school concerts, and plays. What he conveniently failed to mention was that I had organized every single one of those events, sent all the invitations, bought all the gifts, baked all the cakes. He'd simply shown up, smiled for photos, then left. Your Honor, Mr. Davidson said in that smooth, practiced voice lawyer's perfect. My client has been a devoted, attentive grandfather to Emma since her birth. He's deeply concerned that Mrs. Wilson's recent erratic behavior and apparent mental instability might cause her to prevent him from maintaining this important relationship with his only grandchild. Mental instability? I whispered urgently to Mrs. Kim. Let him finish talking, she murmured back. We'll address everything. Mr. Wilson has observed significant, troubling changes in his wife's behavior over the past several months, Mr. Davidson continued. Dramatic mood swings, completely irrational decisions, noticeable memory lapses and confusion. He's consulted with several medical professionals who believe she may be experiencing early-stage dementia or Alzheimer's disease. My blood turned to ice in my veins. Dementia? This is absolutely absurd. Mrs. Kim stood immediately. Mrs. Wilson is completely lucid, coherent, and competent. This is a transparent, desperate attempt to... We have substantial documentation, Mr. Davidson interrupted smoothly, handing a thick folder to the judge. Written statements from neighbors describing Mrs. Wilson's apparent forgetfulness and confusion, medical opinions based on her age and observed behavior patterns. I looked at the statements as Mrs. Kim quickly reviewed them. Mrs. Patterson from next door claimed I'd seemed confused and disoriented when she'd seen me at the grocery store. Mr. Reynolds stated I'd forgotten his name entirely at a neighborhood gathering last month. Both were Edward's close friends, both were clearly lying for him. The judge looked genuinely concerned as she read through the documents. Mrs. Wilson, have you experienced any memory problems or confusion lately? No, Your Honor, I said firmly. I'm 64 years old, not 94. I'm in excellent health both mentally and physically. Perhaps an independent medical evaluation would be appropriate under these circumstances, Judge Patterson suggested. That's when Emma stood up from her seat. Your Honor, may I please show you something that my grandmother doesn't know I have? And now we've circled back to where this story began. Emma walked steadily to the front of the courtroom, her young face set with determination. Rachel followed immediately behind her, looking protective and proud. Emma handed the phone directly to the judge. About 3 months ago I got really worried about Grandma, Emma said, her voice remarkably steady despite obvious nervousness. I overheard Grandpa on the phone one night talking about her, and it sounded really mean and wrong. So I took Mom's old phone that Grandma had given me to play games on, and I started recording conversations. Just in case I needed proof. Recording what conversations specifically? Judge Patterson asked gently. Grandpa, when he would come over to our house to talk to Mom about the divorce. He didn't know I was listening from upstairs or hiding around corners. Emma pressed play. Edward's voice filled the courtroom, crystal clear and unmistakable. I don't care what your lawyer says, Rachel. Your mother is not getting a single dime from me. I've worked far too hard for far too long to let her walk away with half of everything I've built. Rachel's voice responded, sounding exhausted. Dad, after 42 years of marriage, she deserves exactly what I decide she deserves, Edward interrupted harshly. I've already spoken with Dr. Patterson. He's agreed to testify that she's experiencing significant cognitive decline. Dementia, early Alzheimer's, whatever diagnosis we need to make this work. With that medical testimony on record, I can successfully argue she's not competent to make sound decisions about the divorce. I'll petition for conservatorship, gain control of everything, and she'll end up right back where she belongs. Under my control. My hands flew to cover my mouth. Mrs. Kim gripped my shoulder firmly. Dad, that's fraud, Rachel's voice said on the recording. You can't do that. It's illegal. I can and I will, Edward's voice replied coldly. Your mother has embarrassed me enough already. Walking out after 42 years, making me look like some kind of villain to all our friends and colleagues. She's going to learn exactly what happens when you cross me. The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. Judge Patterson's expression had transformed from concern to fury. She looked directly at Edward, who had gone completely pale. Mr. Wilson, she said in a voice like ice, did you just hear yourself openly admit to planning to commit fraud upon this court? Mr. Davidson was frantically whispering to Edward, but Edward was staring at Emma as if he couldn't comprehend what had just happened. Your Honor, that recording was taken completely out of context, Edward stammered. Out of context? Judge Patterson's voice could have cut through steel. You just admitted on a recording to planning to fabricate a medical diagnosis in order to gain control of your wife's assets and manipulate these proceedings. That's not only fraud, it's elder abuse. There are more recordings, Emma said quietly, scrolling through the phone with trembling fingers. He said a lot of mean things about Grandma when he talked to Mom. And once he came over when Mom wasn't home, and I hid in the upstairs hallway and recorded him talking to Grandma. She pressed play on another clip. Edward's voice emerged, cold and calculating in a way that made my skin crawl. Helen, this is absolutely ridiculous. Come home immediately. You're making yourself look senile, confused, unstable. The judge is going to see right through this pathetic act. And then where will you be? Probably in some nursing home with me controlling every aspect of your care. Is that really what you want for yourself? My own voice responded, small and shaky in a way I barely recognized. I just want a divorce, Edward. That's all I want. You want to throw away 42 years just like that? Fine, do what you want, but I'm going to make absolutely certain you walk away with nothing. And I'm going to make sure everyone in our social circle knows you've completely lost your mind. Your sister, your friends, Emma, they'll all think you're crazy and delusional. Who's going to believe a 64-year-old woman who suddenly decides her perfectly good husband is the enemy? There was the sound of a door slamming violently. Then Emma's young voice shaking with fear. Grandma, are you okay? Are you hurt? I'm fine, sweetheart. I'm perfectly fine. But I hadn't been fine, not even close. I'd cried myself to sleep that night, wondering if I'd made a catastrophic mistake, wondering if maybe I really was crazy to think I could start over at my age. Judge Patterson turned to Mr. Davidson with barely contained anger. Counselor, I strongly suggest you have a very serious conversation with your client about the severe penalties for perjury and attempted fraud. As for this grandparent visitation matter, I'm denying Mr. Wilson's petition entirely and completely. Furthermore, I'm issuing an immediate restraining order. Mr. Wilson is to have absolutely no contact whatsoever with Mrs. Wilson, Rachel Wilson, or Emma Wilson, pending the final outcome of the divorce proceedings. Your Honor, please. Edward started to stand. Sit down, Mr. Wilson. I'm not finished speaking. The judge's voice was pure ice. I'm also referring this entire matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges related to your admitted plan to defraud this court and commit elder abuse against your wife. Edward's face transformed from pale to a deep, angry red. This is completely ridiculous and absurd. That child recorded me without my knowledge or permission. In your daughter's home, where you had absolutely no expectation of privacy whatsoever, Judge Patterson interrupted. And thank God she did, or you might very well have succeeded in your reprehensible scheme. Judge Patterson looked at Emma with something that resembled admiration and respect. Young lady, you may have just saved your grandmother from a terrible injustice. What you did took remarkable courage. Emma looked at me, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you, Grandma. I didn't want to scare you or worry you more than you already were. But I heard what he was saying and planning, and I knew he was being cruel, and I just wanted to protect you and help you. I stood up and went to her immediately, pulling her into my arms tightly. You did help me, sweetheart. You helped me more than you could possibly know. The main divorce hearing 2 weeks later was almost anticlimactic after the drama of the custody hearing. Mr. Davidson had withdrawn from Edward's case entirely after Judge Patterson's threat of sanctions for his involvement. Edward's new attorney, clearly fully informed about what had transpired, strongly advised him to settle everything quickly and quietly. I received half of everything. The house would be sold and the proceeds divided equally. The retirement accounts, the investment portfolios, the savings. All of it split down the middle. After 42 years of having absolutely nothing in my own name, I was going to be financially independent for the first time in my adult life. But even more valuable than the money, I had my freedom, my autonomy, my life back. The day the divorce was officially finalized, I was 64 years and 5 months old. Rachel took Emma and me out to celebrate at an elegant restaurant downtown, the kind of place I'd never been allowed to choose when I was married. "What are you going to do now, Mom?" Rachel asked over dessert, a decadent chocolate cake we were all sharing. I thought about it carefully. I had money now, not a fortune by any means, but enough to live comfortably. I had time stretching before me. I had myself back after decades of losing her piece by piece. "I think I might travel," I said slowly, tasting the words. "Maybe take some art classes or writing workshops. I always wanted to write poetry seriously, not just as a hobby I hid from your father." "What about dating?" Emma asked with a mischievous grin. "You're single now, Grandma. You could meet someone nice." I laughed, really laughed, for what felt like the first time in years. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I have a lot of living to do first. 42 years of living to catch up on, actually. That conversation happened 7 months ago. I'm 65 now, living in a charming small condo I purchased with my settlement money. It has enormous windows that let in floods of natural light and a spare bedroom I've converted into a writing studio. My poetry has improved enough that I had one piece published in a local literary magazine last month. Just a small poem about new beginnings, about finding yourself after losing yourself, but someone thought it was worth publishing. Someone thought my words mattered. I have coffee with Barbara every single week. No permission required, no guilt attached. I'm taking a creative writing class at the community college. I joined a women's book club that meets twice a month. Last month I traveled to Vermont for a weekend poetry workshop, something I'd dreamed about for decades. Rachel and Emma come over for dinner every Sunday without fail. Emma's doing exceptionally well in school. She told me last week she wants to become a lawyer now. "To help people like you did for me, Grandma," she said. "To protect people who need protection." I told her she would be absolutely wonderful at it. As for Edward, I've heard through mutual acquaintances that he's bitter and angry, telling anyone who will listen that I stole half his money after he supported me for 42 years. Some people believe his version, some people take his side. I don't care anymore. The people who truly matter know the actual truth. Sometimes I look back at those 42 years and feel profound sadness about all the time I lost, all the dreams I abandoned. But then I remember something important. I have time now. However many years I have remaining, they belong entirely to me. Every decision, every choice, every single day. It's all mine. And it all started because of a 13-year-old girl who loved her grandmother enough to document the truth when no one else could. I keep that old phone on my bookshelf now, even though Emma has a new one. It sits there as a reminder that sometimes the people who save us are the ones we least expect. Sometimes it's a child who sees more clearly than adults do, who understands that love means protecting the people you care about. That phone saved my life in ways I'm still discovering. But more than that, Emma's courage gave me permission to save myself. I'm 65 years old, I'm divorced. I'm a poet, I'm free, and I'm just getting started. But I want to tell you more about those 7 months since the divorce finalized, because they've been transformative in ways I never could have predicted. The first thing I did after moving into my condo was paint every single wall. Edward had always insisted on beige, bland, neutral beige everywhere. I chose warm yellows for the living room, soft blues for the bedroom, a deep green for my writing studio. Rachel and Emma came over to help, and we made a party of it. We played music loudly, ate pizza straight from the box, laughed until our sides ached. It was messy and chaotic and absolutely perfect. The second thing I did was buy myself a completely impractical red dress, not because I had anywhere specific to wear it, but because Edward had always said red was too attention-seeking, too bold for a woman my age. I wore it to my first book club meeting and received so many compliments I nearly cried. The third thing I did was learn to drive again. Edward had always driven everywhere we went, insisting I was too nervous behind the wheel. But I'd had my license all along. I just needed practice and confidence. Rachel sat with me for hours in empty parking lots until I felt steady again. Now I drive wherever I want, whenever I want. The freedom of that still takes my breath away sometimes. My writing class meets every Thursday evening. There are 8 of us, ranging in age from 23 to 72. Our instructor, Professor Martinez, is patient and encouraging in ways I desperately needed. She's helped me understand that my voice matters, that my experiences are worth capturing in words. We share our work each week, reading aloud in the small classroom. The first time I read one of my poems, a piece about finding yourself after decades of being invisible, my voice shook so badly I could barely get through it, but when I finished, there was absolute silence, and then one woman started clapping. Soon everyone was clapping, and Professor Martinez had tears in her eyes. "That was your truth," she said simply. "Don't ever be afraid to tell your truth." The book club has become another unexpected source of joy. We're all women, ages ranging from 58 to 76. Every single one of us has a story about losing ourselves somewhere along the way. Margaret left her marriage after 30 years. Susan retired early from a career that consumed her. Linda is learning to live alone after her husband passed. We meet at different houses each time, drinking wine and talking as much about our lives as about the books we're reading. Last month we read a novel about a woman who reinvented herself at 70, and the conversation that followed was so honest and raw and beautiful that we talked until nearly midnight. These are my people, I realized. Women who understand. Emma has become not just my granddaughter but my friend in ways I never expected. She comes over after school sometimes, doing homework at my kitchen table while I write at the desk in the other room. We make dinner together, and she tells me about her day. The dramas with friends, the challenges with teachers, the boy she might like but isn't sure about yet. She's considering journalism now, in addition to law. "I want to tell people stories," she explained, "especially people whose stories don't usually get told." She's started a blog about standing up to bullies, about finding your voice, about protecting people you love. It has over 1,000 followers already. I'm so proud of her I could burst. Rachel has blossomed too in ways I didn't anticipate. Watching me leave Edward seemed to give her permission to examine her own life more carefully. She started therapy, started dating again, started pursuing a promotion at work she'd been too afraid to apply for. She got it last month. We talk on the phone almost every day now, really talk in ways we never could when I was married. She's told me things about her childhood that break my heart. How she'd felt walking on eggshells around her father. How she'd promised herself she'd never let a man treat her that way. How scared she'd been watching me shrink smaller and smaller over the years. "I'm sorry I didn't protect you better," I told her once. "Mom," she said firmly, "you did the best you could with what you knew at the time. And you protected me in the end by showing me it's never too late to leave, never too late to choose yourself." My sister Barbara has been my rock through all of this. She's the one who helped me pick out furniture for the condo, who went with me to the DMV when I needed to update my license, who held me when I cried over all the years I'd lost. "I kept telling you," she said once. "For years I kept telling you to leave him." "I know," I said. "I just wasn't ready to hear it. I wasn't ready to believe I deserved better." "And now?" she asked. "Now I know I deserve everything," I said. "Peace, joy, freedom, respect, all of it. I deserve all of it." The poetry workshop in Vermont was a turning point I hadn't anticipated. It was a long weekend at a beautiful inn surrounded by mountains, 20 participants, all at different stages of their writing journeys. The instructor was a published poet in her 70s who'd just won a major award. On the first evening, we went around the circle introducing ourselves and sharing why we were there. When my turn came, I found myself telling the whole story. The marriage, the divorce, the courtroom, Emma's recording, everything. When I finished, the instructor nodded slowly. "Write about that," she said simply. "All of it, don't hold back." So I did. I spent that entire weekend writing poem after poem about my marriage, my awakening, my divorce, my rebirth. I wrote until my hand cramped. I wrote until I'd cried all the tears I had. I wrote until I felt empty and clean and new. On the last day, we each shared one final piece. I read a poem I'd titled 64. It was about being told you're too old to start over, about proving that voice wrong, about discovering that life doesn't end at 64. Sometimes it finally begins. When I finished reading, the room was silent for a long moment. Then the instructor stood up and hugged me tightly. "That's why we write," she whispered. "To tell the truth. To set ourselves free." I submitted that poem to 3 literary magazines when I got home. 2 rejected it, which stung. But the 3rd accepted it, and it was published 2 months ago. I bought 10 copies of the magazine, framed one, and gave the others to the people who'd helped me get there. Rachel, Emma, Barbara, Mrs. Kim, Professor Martinez. Emma hung hers in her bedroom. Rachel put hers on her desk at work. Barbara cried when I gave her hers. The financial settlement from the divorce gave me something I'd never had in my entire adult life. Options. Real, tangible options about how to live, where to go, what to do with my days. The house sold quickly for more than expected, and my half of the proceeds combined with half of Edward's retirement accounts meant I had genuine financial security for the first time. Mrs. Kim had been thorough and fierce in negotiating everything. She'd made sure I received half of Edward's pension payments, half of the investment portfolio he'd built over decades, half of everything. After 42 years of having nothing in my name, of asking permission to buy groceries, of hiding small purchases because I was afraid of his reaction, I suddenly had complete control over my own finances. The feeling was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. I'd never balanced my own checkbook, never made an investment decision, never even chosen my own car insurance. For the first few weeks I felt paralyzed by all the choices. Rachel suggested I meet with a financial advisor, someone who could help me understand my options, without making me feel stupid for not knowing. I found Janet through a referral from Barbara. She was a certified financial planner in her early 50s who specialized in working with newly divorced women. Our first meeting was at a coffee shop instead of her office. "I want you to feel comfortable," she explained, "and I want you to understand that there are no stupid questions. You're learning a system you were deliberately kept out of for decades. That's not your fault." We met weekly for the first month. She explained retirement accounts, investment strategies, budgeting, emergency funds. All the things Edward had controlled and hidden from me. She never made me feel inadequate, never talked down to me. Instead, she celebrated each small victory. The first budget I created, on my own. The first investment decision I made independently. The first time I filed my own taxes. "You're doing remarkably well," she told me after about 3 months. "Most of my clients take much longer to gain this level of confidence." "I have a lot of years to make up for," I said. "I can't afford to be timid anymore." One of my biggest fears after leaving Edward was that I'd become a burden to Rachel. I'd spent so many years being financially dependent on my husband that the thought of depending on my daughter felt like failure. But the settlement changed that completely. Not only could I support myself, I could help Rachel in ways I'd never been able to before. When her car broke down unexpectedly, I could offer to help with the repair without asking anyone's permission. When Emma needed expensive dental work, I could contribute without guilt. When Rachel wanted to take Emma on a beach vacation but couldn't quite afford it, I could make it possible. The look on Rachel's face when I offered to help with the vacation brought tears to my eyes. "Mom, you don't have to do this," she said. "I know I don't have to," I replied. "I want to. For the first time in my adult life, I can help my daughter without asking permission. Let me have this." We all went on that vacation together. Me, Rachel, Emma, and Barbara. A week at a beach house in South Carolina. We cooked meals together, walked on the beach at sunrise, stayed up late talking and laughing. Emma learned to boogie board. Rachel read 3 novels. Barbara and I took a painting class one afternoon. On the last night, we sat on the deck watching the sunset, and Emma suddenly said, "This is what family should feel like." She was right. No walking on eggshells, no fear, no need to monitor everyone's moods and anticipate explosions. Just peace. The criminal charges against Edward never materialized, which disappointed me more than I'd expected. The district attorney's office reviewed the recordings and determined that while Edward's planned actions were unethical and morally reprehensible, they couldn't prove criminal intent since he hadn't actually followed through with the fraud. Mrs. Kim had prepared me for this possibility. "Sometimes justice in the legal system and justice in real life don't align," she'd said. "But you're free, you have your settlement, and he can't hurt you anymore. That's its own kind of justice." She was right, but I still felt angry that Edward faced no real consequences for what he'd planned to do to me. No consequences for the 42 years of emotional abuse, for the gaslighting, for trying to have me declared incompetent. but then I'd remember. I was free. He wasn't. He was trapped in his bitterness and anger while I was building an entirely new life. I ran into one of Edward's friends at the grocery store about 4 months after the divorce finalized. Thomas Reynolds, the man who'd lied about me in his written statement. He looked uncomfortable when he saw me. "Helen," he said, clearly wanting to escape but too polite to simply walk away. "Thomas," I replied coolly. I heard about the divorce. I'm sorry it came to that." "I'm not," I said clearly. "Best decision I ever made." He shifted his weight. "Look, about that statement I gave. Edward said you were having real problems, memory issues, and confusion. He seemed genuinely concerned. He was genuinely concerned about losing control over me and my money," I corrected. "And you lied for him under oath. I hope you can live with that." I walked away before he could respond. My hands were shaking but my head was held high. The book club read a novel about forgiveness one month, and it sparked a heated discussion about whether forgiveness was necessary for healing. Some women argued yes, that holding on to anger only hurt yourself. Others argued no, that some things were unforgivable and that was okay. "I've been thinking about this a lot," I admitted when it was my turn to speak. "And I think I've forgiven myself. For staying so long, for believing his lies about me, for thinking I deserved that treatment. But Edward, I don't think I'll ever forgive him. And I'm learning to be okay with that." Margaret, the woman who'd left her own marriage, nodded in understanding. "Forgiveness isn't required for moving forward," she said. "Sometimes acceptance is enough. Accepting what happened, accepting you can't change it, and choosing to move forward anyway. That felt right to me. I could accept my past without forgiving the person who'd caused so much pain." Emma's blog about standing up to bullies had grown significantly, and she asked if she could interview me for a piece she wanted to write. At first, I was hesitant. Did I want my story out there so publicly? But then I thought about all the women who might be living what I'd lived, who might think they're too old or too trapped to leave. We did the interview on a Saturday afternoon at my condo. Emma set up her phone to record, and for 2 hours I told her everything. The isolation, the control, the way Edward had systematically stripped away my confidence and independence. The way I'd convinced myself it was normal, the moment I'd finally said no. When the blog post went up a week later, I was terrified to read the comments. But they were overwhelmingly supportive. Women of all ages thanking me for sharing, telling their own stories, saying I'd given them hope or courage. One comment in particular struck me. "I'm 58 and I thought I was too old to start over. Thank you for showing me it's never too late." I printed that comment and put it on my refrigerator. Professor Martinez encouraged me to put together a collection of my divorce poems for potential publication. The idea terrified me. Publishing one poem in a magazine was thrilling but relatively anonymous. A whole collection? That felt impossibly vulnerable. But I started organizing them anyway. I had dozens of poems now, written in those months of transformation. Poems about invisibility, about finding your voice, about the violence of silence, about rebuilding yourself piece by piece. I showed the collection to Professor Martinez. She read through all of it in one sitting while I waited nervously, picking at my fingernails like a schoolgirl. When she finished, she looked up at me with shining eyes. "Helen, this is powerful work, really powerful. You need to submit this to publishers." "What if they reject it?" I asked. "What if no one wants to read about a 65-year-old woman's divorce? Then you submit to someone else," she said firmly. "But I think you'd be surprised. Your story is universal. Age doesn't matter when you're writing truth." I submitted the collection to 5 small presses that specialized in poetry. 3 rejected it fairly quickly with form letters. The 4th rejection was more personal, saying they loved it but didn't have room in their current schedule. The 5th press accepted it. I got the email on a Tuesday morning while sitting at my kitchen table drinking coffee. I read it 3 times to make sure I understood correctly. They wanted to publish my collection. They loved the raw honesty, the journey from silence to voice. They wanted to work with me to make it even stronger. I called Rachel immediately, sobbing so hard she thought something terrible had happened. When I finally managed to explain, she started crying too. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," she said through tears. So incredibly proud. Emma insisted we celebrate, so that evening we all went out to dinner. Me, Rachel, Emma, and Barbara. We toasted with champagne, even though Emma had to settle for sparkling cider. To Grandma, Emma said, raising her glass. The bravest person I know. To new beginnings, Barbara added. To telling the truth, Rachel said. To freedom, I finished, and we all drank. The publication process took almost a year. There were revisions, editorial meetings, cover design discussions. I worked closely with my editor, a young woman named Sarah, who understood exactly what I was trying to say with these poems. We want the cover to reflect transformation, she explained. Something that captures going from darkness to light, from silence to voice. We settled on a design that showed a woman's silhouette, half in shadow and half emerging into light, with a bird flying free in the bright half. It was perfect. The book was published in November, almost 2 years after I'd left Edward. We had a small launch event at a local bookstore. I'd expected maybe 10 or 15 people. Rachel, Emma, Barbara, my writing class, a few book club members. Over 60 people came. There were women from my book club, my writing class, the poetry workshop in Vermont. There were neighbors from my condo building. There were women I'd never met who'd read Emma's blog post and wanted to support me. There were even a few men, including Thomas Reynolds' wife, who hugged me and whispered, I left him. Because of you. Rachel gave a short introduction, talking about watching her mother transform from someone who couldn't make a decision to someone who'd built an entirely new life. Emma read one of my poems aloud, her voice clear and strong. Then it was my turn. I'd prepared a reading, selecting 5 poems that told the arc of the story. From captivity to escape to rebirth. My voice shook at first, but as I read, I found my strength. I looked up occasionally to see people nodding, wiping tears, holding hands with the person next to them. When I finished the last poem, there was a moment of silence, and then the room erupted in applause. People stood up. Someone was openly crying. Afterwards, people lined up to buy books and have me sign them. Many shared their own stories. Women who'd left, women who were planning to leave, women who were supporting someone trying to leave. One young woman, maybe 25, said, My mom's in a marriage like yours was. Can I give her this book? Please do, I said. Tell her it's never too late. The book didn't become a bestseller, but it sold steadily. It was reviewed in several literary magazines, mostly positive. One reviewer called it a masterclass in finding your voice after decades of silence. Another said it was required reading for anyone who's ever felt invisible. I started getting emails from readers. Women thanking me, sharing their stories, asking for advice. I tried to respond to every single one, even though it was overwhelming sometimes. One email in particular moved me to tears. It was from a woman named Patricia, 72 years old, who'd been married for 50 years. She'd read my book and filed for divorce the next day. I thought I was too old, she wrote. I thought I'd just live out my remaining years in this misery. But you showed me it's not too late. I might not have many years left, but they're going to be mine. Thank you for giving me permission to save myself. I printed that email and put it in a frame on my desk. On days when I doubted myself, when I wondered if sharing my story so publicly had been a mistake, I looked at that email and remembered why it mattered. Emma turned 14, and for her birthday she asked if we could volunteer together at a women's shelter. She'd been researching them for a school project and wanted to help. We started volunteering every other Saturday, helping with donations, organizing supplies, sometimes just sitting and talking with women who needed someone to listen. Many were around my age, leaving marriages after decades. They'd read my book. They wanted to talk to me, to ask questions, to hear that life really could get better. I'm proof, I told them. I'm living proof that it's never too late to choose yourself. Rachel met someone new about 18 months after my divorce finalized. His name was Michael, a high school history teacher with kind eyes and a gentle manner that was the complete opposite of Edward. She was nervous to introduce us at first. Mom, what if you don't like him? She asked me over coffee one morning. What if he reminds you of Dad? Does he make you happy? I asked. Yes, she said without hesitation. Really happy. He treats me like I matter. Then I'll like him, I said simply. That's all I need to know. I met Michael the following week at Sunday dinner. He brought flowers for both Rachel and me, asked Emma about her blog with genuine interest, and insisted on helping with the dishes. He was polite but not obsequious, friendly but not overly familiar. He made Rachel laugh. That was enough for me. Later, when Rachel and I were alone in the kitchen, she said, "He's nothing like Dad." I know, I said, hugging her. That's why I like him. Watching Rachel navigate this new relationship with confidence and clear boundaries was one of the unexpected joys of my new life. She'd learned from watching me lose myself, and now she was learning from watching me find myself again. She negotiated her needs clearly, she maintained her independence. She refused to shrink herself to make someone else comfortable. That's my girl, I thought proudly. Emma's blog had grown to over 5,000 followers, and she was invited to speak at her school's assembly about standing up to bullying. She was terrified, but she did it anyway. She told my story, with my permission. She explained how her grandfather had been a bully, how bullies don't just exist on playgrounds but in homes and marriages and workplaces. She talked about the importance of documenting abuse, of believing people when they tell you they're being hurt, of understanding that love should never feel like control. The principal called Rachel afterward to say it was the most impactful assembly they'd had in years. 3 students had come forward to report bullying after Emma's speech. 2 teachers had thanked her for addressing emotional abuse, saying they'd been in relationships like mine. Emma was invited to speak at 2 other schools. Then a local news station interviewed her. The story went viral locally, and suddenly she was being invited to speak at community events, library programs, even a regional conference on youth advocacy. "I'm so proud of you," I told her after one of her speaking events. "You took something painful and turned it into something that helps people. I learned that from you, Grandma," she said. "You turned your pain into poetry. I'm turning mine into activism." About 2 years after the divorce, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Dr. Patterson, the doctor who'd agreed to testify falsely about my mental competence. It was handwritten, not typed. "Dear Helen," it began, "I don't expect you to forgive me, and I'm not asking for that. But I need you to know that I've been haunted by my agreement to participate in Edward's scheme. I've been in therapy working through why I agreed to compromise my ethics so completely. The truth is that Edward had helped me financially when I was starting my practice, and I felt I owed him, but that debt didn't justify what I agreed to do to you. I've turned in my medical license voluntarily. I can't continue practicing knowing I was willing to lie about a patient's mental health for personal reasons. I'm writing to tell you I'm sorry, though those words feel inadequate. What I almost did to you was unconscionable. I'm trying to be better. I'm trying to understand how I became someone who would do that. I hope you found peace and happiness. You deserve both. Sincerely, Dr. James Patterson." I read the letter 3 times, my emotions complicated. Part of me was still angry. He'd been willing to destroy my credibility, my autonomy, my entire future. But part of me recognized the courage it took to write this letter, to give up his career, to face what he'd almost done. I showed the letter to Barbara. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to tear this up and throw it away. Part of me thinks I should respond." "You don't owe him anything," Barbara said firmly. "Not forgiveness, not a response, nothing." She was right. I didn't owe him anything. But after thinking about it for several days, I wrote back. Not a long letter, just a few sentences. "Dr. Patterson, thank you for your honesty. I hope your therapy helps you understand yourself better. I'm not ready to forgive yet, and I may never be. But I appreciate that you're taking responsibility for your actions. That's more than most people do. Helen Wilson." I mailed it before I could second-guess myself. My writing continued to evolve and grow. After the poetry collection, I started working on a memoir, expanding the story beyond the poems into full narrative. It was harder than I'd expected, requiring me to excavate memories I'd buried deep. But Professor Martinez and my editor Sarah both encouraged me to push through the discomfort. "The story needs to be told fully," Sarah said. "Not just the escape, but the years leading up to it. Help people understand how someone gets trapped in that kind of situation." So, I wrote about the early years of my marriage, when Edward had seemed charming, protective rather than controlling. I wrote about the gradual escalation, the way freedoms disappeared one by one so slowly I barely noticed until they were all gone. I wrote about the self-doubt, the constant second-guessing, the way I'd learned to anticipate his moods and adjust myself accordingly. It was painful work, but it was also liberating. Each chapter I finished felt like releasing another piece of the past. Rachel read the manuscript and cried. "Mom, I had no idea it was this bad for this long," she said. I knew it was bad, but reading all the details. I should have protected you better, I said for the 100th time. Mom, she interrupted firmly. You did protect me in the most important way. You eventually left. And you showed me what strength looks like. That's everything. The memoir was published 18 months after the poetry collection. This time, the launch event was bigger. Over 100 people came. There were local news cameras. A reporter from a women's magazine wanted to interview me. This time, I wasn't nervous about reading. I'd found my voice, and I wasn't afraid to use it anymore. The book was reviewed more widely than the poetry collection. Most reviews were positive, praising the raw honesty and the ultimate message of hope. A few criticized me for leaving so late, for not protecting Rachel better, for staying as long as I did. Those reviews stung, but Barbara helped me process them. People who've never been in that situation can't understand it, she said. They think they'd have left on day one. But it doesn't work that way. The book sold better than the poetry collection. I started getting invited to speak at events, women's organizations, book clubs, libraries, even a few domestic violence prevention conferences. At first, public speaking terrified me. But Emma coached me, sharing tips she'd learned from her own speaking engagements. Just tell your truth, she advised. That's all people need to hear. Your truth, in your words. At one speaking event, a woman in the back row stood up during the Q&A session. She was probably in her 70s, impeccably dressed. I just want to say thank you, she said, her voice shaking. I've been married for 53 years to a man who treats me exactly like your husband treated you. I thought I was trapped. I thought it was too late. But hearing you tonight, I'm going to leave, I'm going to do it. I might be 74, but I'm going to leave. The room erupted in applause. After the event, that woman found me. Her name was Dorothy. We exchanged phone numbers, and I connected her with Mrs. Kim, my divorce attorney. 6 months later, Dorothy sent me a photo of her new apartment, a small place with big windows overlooking a garden. I'm free, her text message said. Because of you, I'm free, I cried happy tears. On the 3rd anniversary of leaving Edward, Rachel organized a celebration. We went back to that same beach house in South Carolina. Me, Rachel, Emma, Barbara, and this time Michael too. We recreated that sunset evening on the deck, all of us gathered together. Emma, now 16, stood up with a glass of sparkling cider. I want to make a toast, she said. 3 years ago, my grandmother did the bravest thing I've ever seen. She chose herself, she chose freedom, and in doing that she taught me the most important lesson of my life. That you're never too old, never too trapped, never too far gone to save yourself. We all raised our glasses, tears streaming down our faces. To Grandma, Emma continued. To the woman who saved herself and showed thousands of other women they could save themselves too. To Helen, everyone echoed. Later that night, I sat alone on the beach watching the waves under the stars. I thought about who I'd been 3 years ago. Small, silent, scared, convinced I was too old to start over. And I thought about who I was now. A published author, a public speaker, a woman with her own money and her own choices and her own life. I'd lost 42 years, but I'd gained myself. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a woman named Sarah who'd attended one of my speaking events. She'd sent a photo of her signature on divorce papers. I'm 68, she wrote. I thought I was too old. You showed me I'm not. Thank you for saving my life by saving yours. I looked up at the stars and smiled. Emma came down to the beach and sat beside me in the sand. What you thinking about, Grandma? She asked. I'm thinking about how one moment of courage can change everything, I said. 3 years ago I said no to your grandfather for the first time, and you were brave enough to document what he was doing. 2 moments of courage and our whole world changed. Do you ever regret it? She asked quietly. Leaving? Starting over so late? Not for a single second, I said firmly. My only regret is not doing it sooner, but I did it when I was ready, when I was strong enough. That's what matters. Emma leaned her head on my shoulder. You know what's amazing, she said. You didn't just change your life, you changed mine and Mom's too. And now you're changing lives for people you've never even met. That's what I love most about writing and speaking, I said. Knowing that my pain can help someone else's healing. That my story might give someone else the courage to write their own new chapter. We sat there for a long time, watching the waves, listening to the ocean, existing peacefully in the life we'd all built together. I'm 67 now. It's been 4 years since I left Edward, 4 years since Emma played those recordings in court, 4 years since I became myself again. My second book is doing well. I've spoken at over 50 events across 3 states. I'm working on a third book, a guide for women leaving marriages later in life. Emma is applying to colleges, planning to study journalism and women's studies. Rachel and Michael got engaged last month. Barbara and I have coffee every single week without fail. I bought a car last year. A small red convertible that makes me smile every time I drive it. Edward would have hated it, said it was impractical and attention-seeking. Which is exactly why I love it. I'm taking a watercolor painting class now, something I always wanted to try. I'm terrible at it, but I don't care. I'm learning for the joy of learning, not to be perfect. Last week, a woman approached me after a speaking event. She was crying. I'm 69 years old, she said. I've been married for 45 years to a man who treats me like I'm worthless. But I thought I was too old to leave, too old to start over. Listening to you tonight, I realize I'm not. You're not, I said, taking her hands. You're never too old to choose yourself. I was 64 when I left. You have time. However many years you have left, they can be yours. She hugged me tightly. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for showing me it's possible. That's why I keep telling my story, even when it's painful, even when people judge me for staying so long. Because somewhere out there is a woman who thinks she's trapped, who thinks she's too old, who thinks it's too late. And I want her to know. It's not too late. It's never too late. I keep Emma's phone, the one with the recordings, in a place of honor in my home, not hidden away in a drawer but displayed on a shelf where I see it every day. It's a reminder of where I've been and how far I've come. A reminder that sometimes the people who save us are the ones we least expect. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if Emma hadn't recorded those conversations. Would Edward have succeeded in having me declared incompetent? Would I have spent my remaining years under his control, trapped in a living nightmare? But Emma did record them. She was brave enough to stand up in that courtroom, and I was brave enough to leave in the first place. 2 acts of courage that changed everything. I'm 67 years old. I'm divorced, I'm a writer, I'm a speaker, I'm an advocate, I'm free, and I'm not finished yet. Every day I receive messages from women who've read my books or heard me speak. Women who left because of my story, women who found the courage to choose themselves, women who realized they weren't too old, weren't too trapped, weren't too afraid. Each message reminds me why I did this, why I keep doing this. Not just for myself, but for every woman who needs to know that escape is possible, that rebuilding is possible, that joy after trauma is possible. I'm living proof. Emma's blog has evolved too. She now runs a nonprofit organization that provides resources for teenagers dealing with family abuse. She's spoken at national conferences. She's been featured in news articles. She's making a real difference in the world. And it all started because she loved her grandmother enough to hit record. Last month I received a letter from a publishing house in New York. They'd read my memoir and wanted to discuss a 3-book deal, more books about reinvention, about finding yourself after loss, about starting over at any age. I said yes, because I have more stories to tell, more truth to share, more women to reach. I'm 67 years old, and I'm just getting started. My life didn't end when I left Edward. It began. And every single day, I wake up grateful for the courage I found, for the granddaughter who protected me, for the daughter who supported me, for the sister who never gave up on me. I wake up grateful for my freedom. And I wake up ready to help other women find theirs. This is my truth. This is my story. And I'll keep telling it for as long as someone needs to hear it. Because it's never too late to save yourself. Never too late to choose freedom. Never too late to start living the life you deserve. I'm proof of that. And if I can do it at 64, anyone can.